Hey guys, welcome back to Whitetail Affinity. Welcome to the Whitetail Affinity studio that I put together to record these videos at my house. I've got my daughter Sutton here, she's helping me out today. In today's video, I wanted to do a fun, unscripted video on some common deer hunting terms and slang and lingo that maybe you've heard before, maybe you haven't, but some of them are kind of confusing. So I've got a whole list here of all kinds of things about deer hunting. This is not an all-inclusive list by any means. It's just something that I've been thinking about, and I've been compiling this list for the last probably 2 weeks or so, just as I'm going about my daily activities, you know, thinking about deer and hunting and all that stuff. And a lot of these, some of them are funny, some of them are, you know, have to do with more serious, the more serious side of deer hunting. But whether you're a beginner or an old timer that's been hunting for years, you might have heard these, maybe not, but either way, I hope I can help you learn something by explaining some of these. They're not in alphabetical order. I wrote them down as I thought of them. So if there's anything in this list that you guys want to know more about, please let me know in the comments, and I will absolutely do a video explaining in more detail on any of these subjects. So I'm going to give a brief description of whatever it is, whatever the word is. I'm going to say the word, give a brief description of what it is, and then move right on to the next one. It's a long list, so I don't want to drag this out too long. So here we go.
Well, that's exactly what we want him to do.
I just blew that shot. First one is buck, which is a male deer. They have antlers. They have other parts that the females don't. The next one is doe. Obviously, it's a female deer. Does, a lot of times people call them baldies or slickheads, or my least favorite, freezer queen. If you hear any of those, somebody is talking about a doe, a female deer. Next, you have a fawn, which is a baby deer, usually within its first year of life. Typically after a year or so, they are considered a doe if it's a doe, a female. A button buck is a fawn from that year. So if you see a button buck, that deer was born in usually between April and early June. The next one, button buck, also known as a nubbin buck. Some people call it nubbin. Again, that's a young, less than probably 6 to 8 month old deer by the time hunting season is here. The next one would be wall hanger. Wall hanger is a subjective statement about a buck that is big enough to be mounted and hung on the wall, such as this guy here. Again, it's very subjective. That deer might be, you know, a lot of guys might let that deer walk depending on the area. A lot of guys, that's a wall hanger. To me, it was, so there he is. The next one, swamp donkey. This term became popular a few years ago. I'm not sure who coined it or said it first. It seems like I remember Michael Waddell saying it, but swamp donkey would be like a buck that lives in the swamp. That it's just kind of a funnier term. Stud, you'll hear that a lot when people are referring to a big buck or a bigger buck. A lot of guys will say, man, he's a stud. You know, it's just referring to an older deer, bigger deer that has the qualities of being a quote-unquote stud. The next one, hot doe. If you hear someone say hot doe, they're referring to a doe that is in estrus, which is their heat cycle. It's a lot of times when people refer to a hot doe, like they'll say, you know, there's a hot doe over there in that bedding area, meaning since there's a hot doe, which would be she's in estrus, potentially there could be bucks following her or being in that area because of her. Winded. Winded is when you're hunting and a deer smells you, and we typically refer to it as being winded as hunters. Next one, busted. Busted is when a deer spots you, smells you, knows you're there in some way, busts you, and usually takes off and you don't get a shot or a chance. Hang and bang. Hang and bang is a term used by a lot of mobile hunters, and it kind of refers to going into an area and hanging a set in a tree, whether it's tree stand, saddle, whatever, and banging out that area, hoping to capitalize on something. Ground and pound, kind of the same thing, except this is for guys that are on the ground hunting. Basically, you go into an area, hunting off the ground, and pound it until you have success. Run and gun, kind of up the same vein there. Run and gun is refers to a mobile hunting style where you are, actively searching out sign and trying to find the deer instead of waiting for them to come to you in any given spot. This is one of my least favorite terms when it comes to hunting. Everybody says run or running. It's when somebody says, I'm running that saddle or I'm running this camera, they're referring to what? All right, we're back. Had to have a potty break. Also, I was going to say too at the beginning of the video, I'm going to try to include pictures of a lot of these things just so I have a visual to give you guys. But running refers to somebody using something, and it's become a popular term to describe that for whatever reason. The next one would be estrus. Estrus it refers to a doe that is hot or in estrus. That's her heat cycle. It's the breeding season when she's ready to be bred. Next one, harvest. Harvest, this is another one that I really don't care for. We don't harvest deer, we kill them. You harvest crops, you harvest things that you plant and grow to be used as food or to be used as something, but deer aren't one of those. So harvest, you'll hear that, it just simply means kill. A lot of people, I don't know whether they just don't like saying kill or if it's cleaner or whatever you want to call it. That's what that means. Antlers are what a male deer has. Antlers up here, here. It's the hard bone on their heads that grows. Skunked. When you hear someone say they got skunked, it just means that they didn't see anything. Drive is a term used to describe a deer drive, which is where you'll have people sitting, waiting, and you'll have another group of people, they call it pushing. Another little offshoot of a drive is pushing. You'll hear that term as well. They're pushing through an area, trying to jump deer out of their beds or push them in some manner to the people that are waiting, sitters that are waiting to shoot the deer. So next we have a cull buck. A cull buck, C-U-L-L, is a buck that mostly on big managed properties, ranches, stuff like that. A cull buck they'll take a cull buck because they're trying to get that smaller genetic gene out of the gene pool. Cull bucks usually don't have the greatest antlers, or they don't have the biggest antlers, so they're trying to get that out of the gene pool so it doesn't pass on to the next generation and so on. If it's brown, it's down is a term used by a lot of hunters that if it's brown, it's down, which any deer is a go, basically. Any legal deer, they're going to shoot it. Didn't go 20. Didn't go 20 was popularized by Rut Daniels. He does a lot of funny videos. You've probably seen him. Catching Deers is the brand. And didn't go 20 refers to the deer didn't go 20 yards after being shot. Boiler room. Boiler room is a term that describes the mid body of a deer, its heart, lungs, the area that you're always trying to aim for and shoot. The most effective spot to shoot a deer. What, honey? The most effective spot to shoot a deer is its boiler room. Velvet is what a deer's antlers have on it as it's growing throughout the summer and early fall. It's a soft, velvety covering of the antlers that protects the horn or the hard bone while they're growing. Spooked is a term used to describe scaring deer. If you're walking into an area and somebody says, I spooked them over here, or they got spooky, the deer knew something was up, is spooked. It just means that the deer was scared. A funnel describes a terrain feature in which it funnels deer to a point or a skinnier part of the terrain to where you can have a better chance at success of getting on that deer or those deer. Funnels are generally like a saddle, which I'll get to that. It could be a fence row. It could be a spot where there's a piece of dry ground between two wet areas. Basically any part of the woods or an area that makes a deer go into a general direction based on terrain. Mast refers to a crop of something food-wise for deer. Usually acorns is what a lot of people refer to as a mast crop. Acorns, apples, locusts, basically any fruit-bearing tree or tree that drops something that the deer consume. Could also be referred to as soft mast. You'll hear that. That's mostly fruits. So anything that a plant is producing something for the deer to eat is a mast crop, basically. A pinch point kind of ties back into the funnel. A lot of pinch points are funnels. A pinch point is basically a spot where, like I said before, where two wet areas are here and there's a piece of dry ground right here. That's a pinch point. It pinches the deer travel and access down to that point. It could be water, it could be land features, it could be houses. Basically, if you have a house here and a house here and there's a strip of woods, that's technically a pinch point. It pinches the deer movement and travel and access through that area. Quartering, this one is for shot angle. There's two different kinds of quartering, but shot angle refers to a deer that is turned to you, towards you, or away from you. If this is its head, it's either quartering to you, which means it's not straight on, it's not broadside, it's quartered in some way, or it's quartering away in some way, where you base your shots on how it's quartering if you're taking a quartering shot. The other quartering is when it refers to processing. Quartering, when it comes to processing, is where you take the front shoulders, the hind quarters, basically you're stripping the body of the deer of its meat to further process. But basically it's the legs, like the shoulders, the hind quarters, back straps, all the meat off that rib cage, off the spine, everything to get it to the point where you're deboning it, basically. Next one would be rattling. Rattling is where you take either antlers or a rattle bag, some sort of something that emulates deer horns or deer antlers clashing together as though two bucks are fighting. Hunters use that to get deer to come in, try to attract them. It sounds like two bucks are fighting, so another buck hears it, comes in to see what's going on, try to steal that doe or fight off the other two bucks, however it may be. The next one would be rub. A rub is basically a tree that gets its bark shaved off by a deer and by its antlers. They usually make rubs to and from their bedding areas, down travel corridors. Basically, you'll hear signpost is another term that refers to a rub. A lot of rubs are made to get out aggression, to signpost an area that the deer is living in, making it basically his, which ties into the next one, which would be scrape. A scrape is a bare dirt or a bare spot in the dirt where deer come to and urinate in. There's licking branches that are associated with it. We'll get to that as well. Actually, I can just do licking branch with a scrape since it ties right into it. So you have a scrape on the ground, which is bare dirt, and then above it usually is a branch that the deer rubs its the orbital glands around its eye, top of its head. It'll rub that, lick that branch, and leave scent. It'll also urinate in the scrape, like I said, on the ground, rubbing its tarsals together, peeing over those tarsals, leaving its scent, and then that signals to other deer that deer's scent, as well as does. That's how they communicate. Next one will be pre-rut, rut, and post-rut. So this refers to the breeding season of the deer, which is typically November, late October through December in most areas. Some areas in the south are later. Some northern areas are a little earlier. But the pre-rut is basically when bucks are seeking, they're making the most scrapes and rubs, and they're trying to find does that are coming into estrus. That's probably one of the most exciting times of the year to be in the woods because the bucks are moving in daylight, actively on their feet a lot more than normal. The main rut is when bucks are locked down with does. You'll hear this term as well, lockdown, which means the buck is with a doe in an area locked down to where he won't leave that doe because she's ready to be bred, and he's going to breed her, you know, finish the job until he goes in search of another doe. So, but the rut is that main breeding time, peak breeding phase of the year. Post rut refers to after the rut, where there's a secondary rut that usually comes in about a month after the main rut, and that's part of the post rut. So post rut includes that second breeding period, about a month later, when those fawns from that year, say this year, the fawns that were born this year, a lot of them come into estrus later than the adult does, and that second rut is a smaller window. It's less intense as the main rut, but that post-rut period is the period after the rut. It includes the second rut. Scouting refers to trying to see sign, find deer, looking for previous as well as current sign to base your hunting efforts on as far as locations and where to set up. A shed is an antler that's fallen off of a buck, of an adult male deer after usually in the winter, early spring. They start shedding anywhere from December usually to, there's anomalies with everything. I've seen deer all the way into April with their previous year's antlers still on, but usually between December and like February is when their antlers fall off. So that would be what a shed is. Spike is a deer with just two antlers straight up, Michigan 11 point, as a lot of guys call them here in Michigan. Year and a half old deer. Still hunting refers to going through the woods slowly and actively hunting, but you're just slowly walking through the woods, trying to be as still as you can, constantly scanning, looking around as you are moving through the woods. A tag is another word for license. So your deer license is your tag. Tines and points. Behind me here, you can see these bucks. They're tines. These are tines. And these are points. I mean, tines and points are kind of synonymous. They usually, if a deer has a point, it's usually considered a tine. Sometimes they're small though, you know, just little nubs, and a lot of guys won't consider them a tine. So that's that. Venison refers to deer meat. A lot of guys from the South, especially, I've said venison before to some of my buddies from Ohio and Florida, and they're like, "What the hell is venison?" And I said, "It's deer meat." And they're like, "Why don't you just call it deer meat?" I'm like, "I don't know. We call it venison up here." Mature refers to a deer that is older. Usually, like a buck is considered mature when he's like 3.5 here in Michigan, 4.5 or older in most other Midwest states. A tree stand is a device that you hang up in a tree to sit in to hunt out of, and I'll show you a picture here of a tree stand. A blind is basically anything that conceals you. It's a broad term. There's ground blinds, as far as homemade ground blinds with natural brush and whatnot, and logs and stuff like that. There's pop-up blinds, which I'll show you a picture here of a pop-up blind. There's box blinds, which are pre-constructed, usually on private land, basically like a little tiny house to hunt out of. A climber is a tree stand that you attach to the tree and you can climb with it to get up the tree. You don't have to hang any steps or a ladder or nothing like that. It attaches to the tree and you move your way up the tree, moving the stand with you. A ladder stand is basically, just like the name says, is a stand that you put up and it has a ladder going up to it, usually with a single or double man platform, shooting rail, stuff like that. Saddle there's two different saddles. One, the saddle with the as far as the hunting item is concerned, is a device you wear. I'll show you a picture here that you hang out of the tree in to hunt out of. This is what I use primarily when I hunt. It's very lightweight, portable, mobile. The other saddle is a terrain feature, and kind of like I explained a little bit earlier, basically a saddle in as far as terrain goes is where, say you have a ridge or two ridges that end and they dump down into a lower area. That lower area is a saddle, and deer love to travel in those saddles because they're hidden better. The scent drops in those saddles a lot more, so they have advantages from that standpoint. But as far as from a hunting standpoint, saddles are awesome. I love hunting saddles. They're great deer funnels and basically pinch points that deer love to use. A grunt call is a device that you use to emulate a deer making a grunt, either a buck or a doe. They make both kinds. Usually grunt calls have doe and buck built into the same call. Tying into that would be a can call. Can call is usually, I guess I should say always, only can call that I've ever seen is a doe bleat, and you tip the can over and it makes the sound of a doe bleating. Fork horn. Fork horn is basically a 4-point buck, which is just forks like that, looks like forks. I'll show you a picture here of a fork horn just so you have a better idea. Broadside refers to a shot angle where the deer is standing sideways to you, basically straight on or perpendicular to you, but straight this way. The best opportunity for a shot is broadside. Then you don't have any of the quartering factors at play there. Next one would be bleating. Bleating is a term that usually refers to a doe making a sound. Doe bleat is usually how we say it as hunters. Blowing. Blowing is when a deer smells something it doesn't like, sees something it doesn't like, is scared in some way, and what they do is they blow really hard, and it's not only the sound alerts other deer, it's not only for that, but the main purpose is so that they're clearing their nasal passages so that they can smell get as much of whatever scent that they caught. They're getting as much as clear of a picture of what they're smelling as they can. So they're getting all the other scent out of their sinuses or nasal cavity, and they're trying to pick up whatever it is that they smelled better. A lot of guys say slob. A slob refers to a big buck. I mean, it's kind of like a stud or a swamp donkey. A slob is just a funny way to describe a nice deer. Same thing with booner. Booner refers to a big buck that could be entered in the Boone and Crockett Club. We'll get to that as well, but booner, a lot of guys use it even when the deer isn't technically a booner. A lot of guys will say booner to describe a big buck. So broadhead is what we use on the ends of our arrows and bolts for archery hunting, for bow hunting. That's the business end of the arrow, kills the deer. A ridge is a terrain feature where you have a hill that goes up at some elevation. It could be 20 feet, could be 100 feet, but that's a ridge. Basically a hillside. A lot of them they can either be like a peaked ridge, or they could go straight up and then flatten out. A lot of times, like where I've hunted a lot, there'd be a swamp or something, some other low-lying land feature at the bottom of that ridge, and then you'll have that hill, that ridge goes up, and then it flattens out to like an oak flat up top or something like that. Contour lines. Contour lines are what describes and what shows hills and those ridges and all that kind of stuff on a topo map, a topographical map. Basically, it shows what difference in elevation from this point to this point is in a given area. Tying onto that would be topo, which is a lot of guys say topo map. Topo maps are topographical maps that show basically the undulations of the land. Shows ridges and valleys and low-lying areas. high points. A lot of hunters base their moves on that information that they get from those maps. And then tying onto the back of that would be app scouting and hunting apps like Onyx and Hunt Stand, Spartan Forge, HuntWise. There's a bunch of them now. But basically, when someone says, I marked that spot on my Onyx, they're referring to a hunting app on their phone. Really useful tool that has a lot of features, and I could do a whole video just on that. But next we would have rack. Rack refers to like the deer, a buck's antlers, which is its rack. So you'll hear a lot of guys say trash when they talk about a deer's antlers. If it's got a lot of sticker points and abnormal tines and just funky looking stuff, they'll call that trash. So if you hear a guy say, yeah, that buck, it was a big old 10 point, had a bunch of trash all at the bases, that's what they're referring to, is those abnormalities in its antlers. Brow tines, you'll also hear these called eye guards. These right here are brow tines. This one only has one. He's got a couple of little stickers here, which would be considered trash. But this is the brow tine, also known as eye guards. G2s and G3s, these refer to basically the classification for the tines of the antlers when it comes to scoring or referring to which, like say this G2 was 11 inches long, so it goes from back to front. You got G1, which is the brow tine. A lot of guys, we don't even hardly say G1, but we always say G2, which would be the first and usually the longest antler on the back side of the rack, and then G3, and then this guy's got a G4 and G5. I don't. This is just I've alwas called it a main beam. I don't think I've ever called that a G5, but I guess technically it would be. So if you have a 12 point, 6 on each side, you'd have G1, G2, G3, G4, G5, and then the main beam would be G6. Caliber refers to a specific hunting cartridge or round. And I know before you start bashing me about the cartridge caliber thing, they're totally different things. Yes, I get that. But for the sake of this video, caliber refers to the number associated with your gun that you're using. Say you're using a 243, 270, 300 Win Mag. Those are all calibers of a certain rifle. Same thing with 450 Bushmaster and all the like. So a bolt, there's two different bolts. One is a bolt for a crossbow, which is the arrow of the crossbow. They're called bolts. The other one would be a bolt, as in a bolt action rifle. You have the bolt, which is the mechanism that you use to rack a shell in, and it has the firing pin in it and all that. The next thing would be a basket rack. This refers to a small buck that has just a rack that's shaped and looks like a basket. Next is tarsal. Tarsal glands are on the back legs of a deer. They are what the deer urinates over when they're peeing into a scrape. They have scent on them. The very, very nasty scent, honestly. That's a part of the communication for the deer is their tarsal glands. It's one of a big way that bucks find does. Tarsals leave a lot of scent. The interdigital gland is a gland between the hooves of a deer, right up in here, and that gland leaves not only ground scent as far as being able to follow that deer, other deer can follow that deer based on that scent, but also this is how dog trackers track a wounded deer. So when a deer is wounded, they will leave, I don't know what it is, but I know it's some sort of stress hormone or some sort of, scent that is telling that it's in distress. So that's how dogs follow those tracks, even with no blood, is they're following the interdigital gland scent from between the hooves. Next we have a licking branch, which we already covered with scrapes. Next would be winded. So winded, did we cover winded? We did. We covered winded as well. Sorry, this list has gotten away from me apparently. Like I said, it's a big list, but I wanted to cover a lot of stuff with it. So next would be a runway. Runway refers to basically a deer trail. Deer use runways to get from point A to point B, and a lot of hunters use runways to find deer, set up on deer, etc. Thermals refer to basically currents of air that are heated or cooled by the sun and the earth, and they carry scent or drop scent, carry scent up or drop scent down. A lot of times they are totally different than wind, and they're honestly, in my opinion, they're even more important than wind, because thermals can take your scent a completely different direction than the way the wind's blowing. So again, if you guys want any more information on any of these topics, please let me know in the comments. I will do a complete video on whatever it is you guys want to know more about. So tines and points we covered. A grunt is usually refers to a noise that a buck makes when it's communicating. Ties back into grunt calls. That's what we use grunt calls for, to simulate that grunt sound. A snort wheeze would be a sound that a buck makes when it's aggressive towards another buck, usually. But they also do it as they're following does. I mean, I've seen a lot of different scenarios with snort wheezes. It's a very unique sound, and I actually have a whole video on how to do that sound with your mouth. It's one of the most successful sounds that I've been able to use on deer and have the most response to, is a snort wheeze. I'll put the link in the description down below. You guys can check that out, how to do that. You don't need a call or nothing. You do it with your mouth. A point, when it refers to a terrain feature, point is like any sort of land feature where, say you have a cattail marsh and there's a finger of woods that comes out into that cattail marsh. That would be a point. It could also be referring to in a ridge system, like the very end of the ridge, where the ridge is, peaked up here for a distance, and then that point, or that ridge, comes to a point, and then it just drops off the end of that point. So that would be a point off a ridge. Hope that makes sense. Spread, when it comes to deer antlers, just indicates how wide the antlers are. There's an inside spread and an outside spread. Palmated refers to a deer antler. I don't think I have any bucks that have any palmation. Unfortunately, I'd like to get one that has it because it's really cool. But think like a moose. You know how it's got those two big paddles? Those are basically palmations of the antler. And a lot of times deer will have, especially like back by the G2, G3 off the main beam, it'll be a thick web, almost like a duck foot, where the antler goes up into here. It'll be antler up into this area instead of it being a defined point. So that would be palmated or palmation. Edge, when hunters talk about edges, they're referring to any sort of terrain feature, like say a cornfield that butts up to a woodlot. That right there is an edge. Where a cattail marsh meets the base of a ridge, that transition is also another word that refers to an edge. But that transition from cattail to ridge or woods is the edge. Obviously you have field edges, but there's also a lot of interior edges inside woods too, that a popple slashing turning into a more mature hardwoods, that where it stops being a popple slashing, turns into woods, that's an edge. So edges and transitions are huge when it comes to deer hunting. The other thing kind of ties into that a little bit is stem count. You'll hear guys talk about stem count, like, oh, that's a high stem count area. I'd want to do a hinge cutting, increase the stem count. What they're referring to is more vegetation. High stem count, I think I have got a little video here of a high stem count area versus a low stem count. Basically thickness. High stem count, it's thicker. A lot more a lot more vegetation, trees, saplings, etc. Pope and Young. Pope and Young is a club that is, they've got their own scoring system. A deer has to be 125 inches or bigger to be entered into the Pope and Young club. And basically, it's just a record keeping system and a club that celebrates a bigger deer that can qualify for that. Same with Boone and Crockett. Boone and Crockett's another club that has its own scoring system, and the deer has to be 170 inches or bigger to get into that club. So when someone says Booner, that's what they're referring to, is at least 170 inch or bigger deer, which is, again, why they say Booner, because it's huge. Gross score. So we have gross score and net score. So when a deer is being scored, say this deer here is 120 inches gross. That would refer to it before any deductions are made. So deductions would be things like abnormal points, and if this side has a different circumference on its main beams or bases than that side, that's considered a deduction. So a gross score, this deer being 120 inch gross score, might only score 115 and 4/8 net. So to me, I like gross score, not only because it's given the deer the credit it deserves, but I think the extra character and differences in antlers from side to side just adds, quality and I don't know. Like I said, it doesn't take away from the character of the deer. I could care less about net score. Honestly, I could care less about score in general, but that's what gross and net score are. Net score is what they record in the record books. So there's a 60-day drying period. So if you shoot a Boone and Crockett deer 180 inches when you get it scored, gross scored, has to dry for 60 days and then be rescored. That's its net score, and that's what is recorded in the record book. So that 180 inch deer, after a drying period and having its net score calculated, could be 171 and an eighth, and that's what's recorded in the books. So swirling refers to winds that basically are going like this. It's very hard to hunt in a swirling wind. If you've ever been around a campfire and you're trying to get away from the smoke, that's kind of like a swirling wind. Basically, but a lot of it depends on terrain features as well. When you're in like a valley or like a creek bottom, something like that, a lot of times you'll have a predominant wind direction, just say out of the northwest. But once you get down into that lower area, because the wind's coming across all the trees and the hills and all the things, it's bouncing off of stuff and it's actually circling back around. And thermals come into play with that as well. But basically, swirling wind is one of our worst enemies as a hunter. And then last but not least, we have buck to doe ratio, which refers to the amount of bucks to the amount of does in any given area. A lot of places, it's said that 2 to 1 is like the best ratio. A lot of places are more like 6 or 7 to 1, as far as it should be doe to buck, because we're referring, the first number would be your does to the second number, which would be your bucks. So I don't know why we call it buck to doe ratio. We should call it doe to buck ratio, but anyway, I digress. That's what that refers to. So again, guys, this is not a comprehensive list by any means of hunting. I just thought it would be a fun way to kind of help anybody that's younger, inexperienced, new to hunting, kind of try to sift through some of these terms that can be very kind of crazy, weird jargon when it comes to us as more seasoned hunters. So I hope this helped you guys. And like I said, if you guys have any more questions on any of these, if you want me to go into more detail on anything, let me know in the comments and I will absolutely do that. I've got a few ideas for videos, but your feedback is way more important than what I think. So if you guys, want to know more about something, please let me know. And again, if you guys got any value out of this, let me know. like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next. So until next time, thank you guys all for being here as always, and we'll see you all in the next video.